Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to Provincial Stroke Grounds. My name is Libby Forbes, and I am the Regional Education Coordinator with the Southwestern Ontario Stroke Network, based out of London, Ontario. Today's presentation is titled Amplifying the Patient Journey to Support Transitions in Stroke Care, presented by Dr. Siva Murugapan and Dr. Prima Sami. I would like to share a few housekeeping items before we get started. This webcast will be recorded and archived. It can be accessed through the link that will be provided in the follow-up email. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. Please remember that the views expressed today are those of the presenters. An interactive component will be held during the last 15 minutes when we will have a question and answer period. During this time, please type your questions into the chat box section or use the hand raising function, which is in the top toolbar of your screen. Please complete this evaluation by scanning the QR code. The evaluation link will also be put in the chat at the end of this session. Certificates of attendance were also attached in the email invitation. Please fill in your name and keep for future reference. The Provincial Stroke Grounds Committee mitigated bias by ensuring that there was no industry involvement in the planning or in the education content. The Ontario Regional Education Group, host member on behalf of the Provincial Stroke Grounds Committee, reviewed the initial presentation supplied by the speaker to ensure no evidence of bias. Before I hand it over to our speakers, I would like to just take a minute to acknowledge the various areas of potential reflection that may occur during today's presentation. I would really like to take a moment to challenge each and every one of us to consider, how do our organizations, our networks, and/or our roles within the Ontario stroke system support our patients and support our caregivers throughout multiple transition points? Let's consider, how does our education address aspects of recovery? Do we address individual readiness? Are caregivers involved? Do teaching strategies involve self-management? Do our conversations support various vocational needs? These will all be helpful considerations and points of reflection as we learn about the unique experiences from our guest speakers today. I now have the privilege of introducing our two guest speakers, Dr. Siva Murugapan and Dr. Prima Sami. Dr. Siva Murugapan is a general surgeon in Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. He originally was accredited as a general surgeon with FRCS Ireland and worked in Malaysia for 13 years. He immigrated to Canada and recertified as a general surgeon in 2008 and obtained his Canadian boards. He has worked in Windsor and then Chatham, Ontario since. He is involved in training residents. He loves golf, reading, and trekking. Dr. Prima Sami is an ENT in Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. She was accredited from FRCS Glasgow and practiced in Malaysia for 7 years. In Canada, she recertified with Canadian boards in 2008. She has worked in Chatham since. She has held several leadership roles at CKHA. She loves reading, music, and walking. I will now hand it over to Dr. Murugapan.
Well, good morning. And Libby, thank you for inviting me to this neuro rounds. I have no disclosures, and the main objectives of this talk is to look at my journey and see whether the present system is good and what can be improved upon. That's basically the objective of this. Next slide, please. This slide shows the different transition points in my journey. Next slide. I'll start off with the day when I had my stroke. It was the year 2017, September 29th, 4 p.m. The previous day I was on call. I had a very busy call with no sleep at all, and the next day was a full day of endoscopy. At the end of the day, at about 3:45, I was ready to go home, but I received a call from the emerge saying that they had admitted the previous night a patient with an abscess in the leg. and she was admitted to the medical unit, and they were wondering whether I could see the patient now. So, as usual, I said okay and went up to see her. And she did indeed have a big abscess on her left leg. And I was getting ready to do an incision and drainage. The whole tray was opened, the local was administered, and as I was going to incise, I felt something shift inside my head. And the next second, both legs went weak and I couldn't stand anymore. So I held on to the tray table, and since it's a surgical tray, it was full of steelware, all fell down, created a big ruckus. The nurse who was with me, she was fantastic. She recognized that something has gone wrong. She pushed actually a chair to me so that I could fall into the chair and break my fall. And then she went up to the nursing station, got more nurses, and they called it as a witness stroke, put me on a trolley and wheeled me up to the ER. They were quite fast in recognizing and transporting me. What I want to emphasize here is the nurse recognition of a stroke at this particular time. Yes, she was a nurse in the medical floor, so she's used to seeing strokes. But the same cannot be said for a surgical nurse who has spent 15, 20 years just in surgery. She might know how to recognize a GI bleed, but not a stroke. So, what I'm arriving here at is education not only of the public, but also the personnel in the hospital. This nurse was pretty good to pick it up. Next, I was in the ER and everything was very, very fast. Went for a CAT scan, came back, everything was done so fast. And I received the TPA within 20 minutes of the
Guys. Oh,
stroke.
sorry, guys. I was like, oh, we can see him.
Just
No.
make sure you guys are on mute. Go ahead, Dr. Murugapan.
Sorry. Um, so in the ER, once I received the TPA and was seen by the neurologist, I was able to move my left upper and lower limb. You can see an immediate effect of the TPA. And because of the TPA, they then transferred me to the ICU for neuro monitoring period. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. So in ICU, basically was for observation to see whether there's any side effects of TPA bleeding. But I was all the while very sleepy, and whenever my colleagues or friends came, I was very tearful, very, very tearful. The minute I see them, just tears start running down. I could clearly remember that scenario there. And then after 2 days in ICU, I was transferred to the stroke unit. Similar observations were done in stroke unit, and after a few days was transferred to rehab. Next slide, please. In rehab, I realized that it was very well organized and regimented. I could see that it is a very well oiled system. All the therapies were so well organized that you have you're completely immersed in therapy from morning till afternoon. And this went on for almost 9 weeks of my stay in rehab unit. Also in the rehab unit, we had a discussion about medications because the emotional lability was really high. And so we talked about SSRIs to keep the serotonin in good strength, to keep me upbeat for all the activities. And so I got my SSRIs for that period. And also the therapists used to get together to give an update every so often, which was excellent. The care in the rehab, I should say, was fantastic. I would like to thank all the therapists, take this opportunity to thank them again, period. Uh, Next slide, please. After 9 weeks in rehab, I was discharged home. Once I was home, it felt like I've attended a boot camp and then nothing. So I had to collect my thoughts and see what I need to be done. And at this juncture, you are all alone. I found that family support is very important at this juncture. My wife was there all the way, planning and doing things for me. And there was another support, community support, which was called New Beginnings, where all the post stroke patients, survivors can go for a social gathering. But it was also exercises, yoga, woodwork, painting, and things like that. I think that that is a program by the province, and I think that program is really good to maintain motivation and inspiration among all post-stroke survivors. And it also gave a feeling of, it seems like solace in numbers at the New Beginnings. It is called New Beginnings, period. So this was going on for almost a year. By the end of the year in 2019, my medical leave was over and I had to think about what am I going to do next. So I wanted to go back to work. So back to work rehab started, where I felt we were all alone. The professional bodies just told you that you got to get this done. And mostly it was supervision by other surgeons. That process was actually a mountain to climb. And but somehow it was done, and I was able to do minor surgeries by the end of 2019, and that kept me going. I should also mention during my home stay after discharge from rehab, you're alone, you're very emotional just because you don't know what to do next. So I think I didn't know where to go for psychological support. My counselor was my wife, so I was lucky in that way. And the other counselor was my dog, so I could just pour out to him. Anyway, those days went by, and to stay motivated and inspired, I used distractions like watching inspirational movies on Netflix, listening to music, and playing golf on simulators. Those were my tools. I should also mention that there was a golf rehab program in London, which was excellent, made all of us come out. I hope it is still maintained. That was good to see a lot of golfers who tend to develop stroke. Now, presently, I am licensed for minor surgeries, and 2 years ago, I was licensed for endoscopy, and I am now on my final leg of my journey back to open surgeries, which will start sometime this year. Hopefully, it goes well. And I just hope to inspire a lot of people, post-stroke survivors. If I can do it, they can also do it. I will leave at that for the time being and pass it over to Dr. Sammy, who will summarize as well as give her opinions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Prima, and I'm married to Siva. Before I get on, I just want to thank Libby in case I don't have the opportunity at the end. Thank you so much for coordinating with us, and you're amazing. So, Siva and I were married 25 years at the time he had a stroke. We both work at CKHA. And as you heard, Siva, September 27th, 2017, we had a stroke. It was about 3 in the afternoon, a Wednesday afternoon. It was just another day. I was at my office completing my dictations for the day, and I get a call from my colleague who was working the emerge, and she said, "Prima, where are you? We have Siva here. He had a stroke." So I can't describe what I felt, but I kept thinking, this can't be happening, this can't be happening. And so I made my way to the emergency room. I walked in and he was on a stretcher. There were a few colleagues around him. And he looked directly at me and tears were streaming down his face. That image till today is very vivid in my mind. So I get updated by the neurologist, and while he's being taken care of, I first call my son, who was in the university, and text my daughter. She was in grade 12 then, and then inform our close family members. We do not have any family in Canada. We immigrated in 2005. So it so happened my mother-in-law, Siva's mother, actually flew here and was with us 3 days later. So in ICU, when he was there, he was quite groggy and sleeping a lot. And sitting there beside him, I could not turn off the thoughts running through my head. It was continuous. I was thinking, is he going to be okay? Would we need a full-time caregiver? What about his practice? Are we going to have to let go the administrative staff? Do I have to take time off? Do I have to, are finances okay? On and on, nonstop. And
Dr. Sammy, we just lost you for a minute.
inspired our administrative, yeah. Okay, sorry, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we just lost you for a minute. You're a bit
Can you hear me?
choppy. I can hear you. You might need to turn your camera off.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Should I go ahead then?
Yeah, if you need to, you might want to turn your camera off for a minute just because it's still a bit choppy.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So where was I? So we did get a locum to take over his practice, and our administrative staff were retained. And I decided to continue working full time. So his stroke was a huge shock to the hospital community and many people in our community. And while he was in the stroke unit, there were lines of visitors. And it was, I mean, nice to see that, but unbelievable at the same time. But Siva had a right ischemic stroke. So his left side was weak. The first few days, he had some swallowing difficulty, which passed. He lost bladder control, which he did not regain until 4 to 5 weeks later. But he was always cognitively good. So when we were ready for the rehab bed, we were offered a possible bed in Parkwood Hospital, which we appreciated, but I knew that working full time, I would not get to see him every day. So we decided to stay in Chatham, which was the best decision. So I could see him every day. And working full time, I had to be there for him. So I created a disciplined routine. He was not a big fan of hospital food, so I would prepare him a lunch every day, uh, go up to his room before I started work, put his food in the refrigerator, catch up with him, then I'd go to work. And if I was working in the hospital and I had some time, I'd pop in during lunch hour, finish my work for the day, go home, prep dinner for him. And my mother-in-law, who was visiting, I would bring her to the hospital. We would uh, see him have his supper and spend 2-3 hours with him. And we did this every day. And my mother-in-law left after 5 weeks, but I did this for 9 weeks every day. Of course, on the weekends, there's more time to spend. And during my time in rehab is when I wandered around and chanced upon this little library at the rehab unit where I found a small book called My Stroke of Luck, written by Kirk Douglas. And it was a quick read, nice book. And that's when the idea for writing our own book was conceived, actually. Of course, being a woman of action, I got a dictaphone for Siva. And I said, you start dictating into that all the thoughts, emotions you're feeling. He didn't do any of that. He just was not in the right frame of mind while he was in the hospital. So I let it be. So when he was getting stronger, they were preparing him for discharge. And before his discharge, I had to make sure the home was ready for him. So I had to get railings for the stairs from the garage to the house, bars for the washroom, chair for the shower. So an occupational therapist walked through the home to make sure it was ready for him. And then discharge day came and we came to our world, our home. And like he said, it was different. Like the routine completely changed and there was a huge gap, and patients and families have to figure out how to keep up the momentum. Siva was highly motivated to get better, and we feel until today the SSRIs helped him. I hired a personal support worker, the husband of our housekeeper actually, who was available, and he helped Siva with his personal care initially, and then took him to all the appointments. And boy, we kept him busy. It took a couple of weeks before we got outpatient rehab appointment. But then once that got going, he had those appointments. He had the neuro rehab appointment in Windsor. I also got a personal trainer for him, so he'd go to the YMCA for that. And we got a lot of gadgets for him to train at home, his hand movements, lots of brain game apps on his phone. Then when he got a little bit more independent, driving rehab, golf rehab, and between all these therapies, he also struggled with some left shoulder problems and spasms of his muscles, for which we saw chiropractors, acupuncturists. And about 8 months after his stroke, he actually visited India and got Ayurvedic treatments as well. So lots and lots of physical therapy to get him back his mobility. It helped that he was motivated though. So as time passed, however, he was thinking about what he was going to do for the rest of his life, and a few pathways were suggested and considered. But here you have a man for 27 years prior to his stroke, trained to be a surgeon and worked as a general surgeon. And he just loved it. He loved being a surgeon. it is mainly his identity. So he used to work 80 to 90-hour weeks. Maybe that's what got him into the pickle. And just with the stroke, poof, it was all gone. So he was pretty lost. What do I do with the rest of my life? So after much consideration, he had a discussion with a senior colleague in the university in London, and he said he didn't see why he could not get back to surgery, but it will be a hard road. And boy, was that a hard pathway he picked. Just dealing with the regulations and rules with the college, CMPA, hospital administration, fellow colleagues who become supervisors, all things not within our control, lots of delays, waiting, frustration. So about 18 months after the stroke, this idea of this book did not disappear, and we found a friend of a friend who is a writer, who we discussed, we want to write a book to talk about this journey, which is very unique in some ways because of who he is. And she started doing sessions with us, and all this uncertainty, frustration, loss of confidence, sitting with somebody who we did not know very well, who later became a friend, was amazing. It was like we could pour our emotions out. It was like therapy. So the intent of the book was to inspire others in similar journeys, but the sessions was so helpful to us to get over the turmoil and the roller coaster of emotions we were going through at the time. So sometimes it almost seemed selfish to see the stroke person always focusing on themselves. But I had to constantly remind myself he's fighting to get back his identity. So how did I cope as a caregiver? Sometimes when it was too much, I would drive up to a friend's house and just sit there, break down, and cry. He did not know that. But that release helped. Our golden retriever, Benji, was a great companion. I started praying more devoutly, and I found solace in this. Spiritual music also gave me peace and emotional release, and a canvas painting. I started painting and discovered I had a latent talent, and painting is so relaxing. I started gifting everybody my paintings. And then after 2 years of these challenges, Siva got his certification to do minor surgeries and then later endoscopy. And this gave him a purpose to wake up every morning. And he became happier and more optimistic as he is now. So our ghostwriter got involved in the pandemic at that time and could not complete this journal we were doing to create a book. And so I and my daughter-in-law then finished the book, which was published last August. That is the book. So next slide. To summarize both our journey and identify areas of opportunity, I've identified a few areas. First, the code stroke, which we have at CKHA. I'm not sure if this is in every hospital in the province, but when Siva had the stroke, it wasn't there, but subsequently it was introduced at CKHA. And when a stroke patient is coming in, it's announced over the PA system, and all stroke caregivers are alerted. So a timely care is given to these patients, and this is pretty amazing for our patients. Siva's buddy is a neurologist in Ohio, and he said on the American Stroke Protocol, they routinely put patients on SSRIs. So we discussed this with our neurologist who agreed, and I think it did great for him because he was never on drugs like that. But the emotional lability, I think, is a commonality for stroke patients. I'm sure a neurologist can talk to this. So rehab, and I think there's a gap between inpatient and outpatient rehab, and this is global, I think, everywhere it's the same. And unless the stroke family works hard to top up, recovery will slow down. So there has to be motivation. So the main focus in recovery is physical recovery, and boy, are there mental challenges, and there's no support. And if you're fortunate to have a good family network or social network, you're good. But there are a lot of single patients struggling with this. I know within our healthcare, these would be slow to develop, but even if patients have information about where to access these supports, it would be a good beginning. Being a physician, I could identify these needs and self advocate, but that may not be the case for many others. Finances, if not sound for patients, many of the therapies we sought for ourselves would not be accessible. For example, the driving rehab costs more than $2,000. That would be a lot for some people, but driving is vital to gain independence and with that confidence. So when there's so many constraints for services for the stroke patients, to have caregiver support seems a bit of a stretch. But to start, even if there are brochures for caregivers to give information about supports in the community, like counselors, even podcasts. There's so many podcasts for stroke survivors and families, list of YouTube videos, list of books for stroke families, or like our memoir, for instance. These would be great resources. And finally, the return to work process. There is no support. For us, the Royal College of Surgeons and Physicians certify us to become physicians and surgeons. But when we reached out to them for resources to help a surgeon go back to work, they pushed us back to the college, which is a licensing body. And they just want you to prove that you can safely be a surgeon again. So when all is well, the Royal College certifies you, and you do a great job for years and give service. And when you are down and out with illness, they don't help you find your way back. Also, we felt there's just like all kinds of discrimination out there. Ableism is out there. If you show a disability, you are sometimes thought to be less. So maybe an organization which can work with patients who wish to return to work would be great, because that's an important part of reintegration into community, because today's stroke affects all ages. So with that, we conclude and pass it over to Libby.
Thank you, Dr. Sammy. Before I move slides, I just want to acknowledge that there's several thank yous in the chat, and I truly feel that the messaging that you and Dr. Murugapan have shared today is truly so moving, and it's really impactful for the stroke system as a whole. So well, thank you again, but we can't thank you enough for sharing that really personal and unique experience with us today. Lots of claps and hearts. Thank you. So as we conclude today's presentation, we really wanted to just tie everything together and emphasize that transition management is really a multifaceted area of care that does require further attention. We know that transition management through the literature often includes multidisciplinary team involvement, caregiver education, and follow-up care. However, we also know that there still remains a lack of comprehensive literature to really help us support a standardized approach to transition management. So through our sharing of unique journeys, provincial commitment, and expanded research, we really can work together to strengthen our resources, integrate our individual processes, and grow our patient partnerships to really help improve community reintegration, support quality of life across the continuum of stroke care, and reduce the rate of hospital readmissions. So in summary, we hope today that we have highlighted that the medical complexity of individuals and the role of the informal caregiver continues to rise. For this reason, it is so important to maintain a stroke system of care that supports our patients, supports our families throughout multiple transition points. and ultimately highlighting the unique patient and caregiver perspective like we've done today allows us to uncover areas of systemic opportunity. So I know personally speaking, today has really ignited some thoughts personally on what I can do better, what we can contribute better, and as a network and as a system, how we can continue moving forward. So lastly, I would just like to formally thank both Dr. Murugapan and Dr. Sammy for sharing their unique journey with us today. As mentioned, you've encouraged us all to think very deeply about the different elements of transition management that are so personal to you and how they're occurring within our own networks. Dr. Murugapan and Dr. Sammy do have their email on this slide. They would be happy to connect afterwards as well. And as highlighted, very exciting that they've proudly published a memoir. The image is on the right there. It's titled Frontiers, The Journey of Two Surgeons Through Stroke. So all details about their memoir, including purchasing instructions, can be found on the website that's listed here as well. So with that, I will now open this up for discussion. Just a reminder, the evaluation link will be placed in the chat box. If you have questions, please place them in the chat box or raise your hand and I will call on you. I see, sorry, Dr. Tajaski, I can't see your full name. I'm sorry, but you can go ahead.
All right, I think you're saying Dr. Chaikova, is that right?
That is right.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you both so much, honestly, for sharing your story, especially your, intricate understanding of the healthcare system from your past, medical experiences, bringing this in. I think we need so much more of this. So for context, I'm a physiatrist, a rehab specialist. I do stroke rehab. And absolutely a huge gap that I see is this transition into the community. We have more stroke, like acute, hyperacute, even inpatient rehab guidelines that I think do drive, in a way, kind of funding, management. But I have so many patients like yourselves where the drop off of care is there. So I think we need more of that advocacy for the community areas. And as you know, and as was just mentioned, we don't actually have guidelines, so to say, on this for supporting the community measures. So I guess I'm just saying thank you for this. I hope more of this will be advocated for and we continue to support patients like yourself in the community. A question I did have is I'm wondering if you were ever connected to a physiatrist, a rehab specialist.
Yes, I was. I was connected to Dr. Liam in Windsor. I did see her many times, yeah.
That's a part of the neuro rehab. She works in a center where they also have a physiotherapist, and he went for sessions there too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again and best of luck with everything. I'm going to look into your book as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to read a question from the chat from Aditi. As a certified orthotist, I would like to know, were you using any AFO or WHFO brace during the rehab recovery journey?
They did fit
No.
you with something, but it.
To the best of my knowledge, I didn't use any of this AFOs.
They fitted him once with it, but he couldn't make it work for him. So, yeah.
So my next, hello, I'm Aditi. I'm certified orthotist. I'm in Mississauga and Richmond Hill with Mackenzie Health as well. My practice is OrthoCan in Mississauga. I'm ADP authorizer for orthotic devices. So my just counter question was, is the foot drop or claw hand, was it completely recovered and then you did not need any braces? Is that what happened during the recovery process?
Yeah, I did not really have a foot drop or a claw hand.
Okay.
So, yeah.
He still has a residual
Circumduction gait.
like
Okay.
limp.
Yes.
Yeah. And if he's tired, his left arm would come up a bit, but consciously he would straighten it, but otherwise his endurance is improved. He's independent. He does everything. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vanita.
Sorry.
Vanita. anybody else?
I'm not seeing Vanita's hand up anymore. Stephanie Vanderpool.
Morning. Thanks, Libby. Thanks, Dr. Marigopan, Dr. Sammy. I just had a quick question about navigation, and if you think it would have been helpful to have one specific point person throughout your whole journey help you navigate both acute, then your rehab stay, and your community to help you find resources.
That would have been a great idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
Yes.
One person rather than you're looking at many things.
Yeah. That would be good, actually, working with one person. It's your guide, like, yeah, through the journey. Yeah.
I actually have a question. I'm going to go ahead next if that's okay. I'm just wondering, as two physicians, do you feel that the stroke education you received before you went home is what it would have been if you weren't a physician? Like, do you think that that physician title impacted the level or the type of education that you received?
I think it didn't really matter because being physicians, we tend to think and do our own research and see what can help me, you see.
And you can only compare if I had paid attention to how a non-physician patient was managed. So I really do not know how. And like I was always like a step ahead. Like if they mentioned something and looking it up, so we were just focusing on the moment at that time, right? Yeah, but whatever information we needed, we obtained it from very easily, from our colleagues who are taking care of us. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a few questions in the chat from Sue Borelli. First question, how did you find the golf therapy?
Oh, I'm a avid golfer, so it was fantastic for me. Just imagine in the rehab unit, I forgot to mention the recreational therapist. That's the first time I'm hearing that word, recreational therapist. I was in cloud nine, actually. Games, golf rehab. They actually brought a golf stick club to the ward and let me swing the golf club in a simulator. So that perked me up. So every time, so you tend to go for the simulation quite often. So you didn't need any pushing,
In the golf rehab, you went to the golf course, right?
Then the golf rehab, it was actually a competition in London, and it was nice to see a 9-hole course. It was a good outing. I think all these things should be really maintained because they are good for the patients.
Thank you. And the second question, did you receive therapy from a community stroke rehab team?
Yeah, from the hospital. Outpatient rehab. Yeah. We had almost like once a week or a couple of times a week. And these are the appointments our personal support worker was taking him. So many appointments, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Outpatient therapy, neuro rehab, a lot of therapy. Yeah.
Thank
I would
you.
like to say
Sorry.
that I'd like to say that I think we need more neuro physiotherapists. That makes a difference.
Vanita Mystery.
Hi, good morning, doctors and everybody. Great story, and I'm very happy that your journey went well. What I wanted to know is, was your doctor hesitant to recommend SSRIs to you, or were they looking at you and seeing? Because I've done a small presentation on stroke and depression, and sometimes it's dismissed, and other times, with my advocation, sometimes the doctor looks a little bit more into it. Like there might be hesitancy to recommend SSRIs. did you encounter that at all?
No, I think because I was a physician, he said, yeah, you want SSRI? Okay, we'll give you.
Yeah.
That was it.
But then it was recommended by Siva's colleague, who's a neurologist in Ohio. And he says, oh, we put our patients on SSRIs, just talk to your neurologist. And, that went down well. But I think it helped him because that emotional lability wasn't, there anymore. And he was upbeat, right? Yeah. So we believe it helped him. Yeah, I've never seen him cry. So that was hard to see. Yeah.
And how are you doing, Dr. Prima?
I'm good. It
Coping
was a tough journey, a lot of stress, and it put a strain on our marriage. We even got counseling. It was the pandemic then, we did something online, but yeah, the emotional and psychological challenges, it's hard to give complete care, right? Our healthcare system is not bottomless, right? So, but it is real, that emotional challenges and the dynamics, because like very often you think they are so focused on their needs. What about me? But that's why I said we had a stroke. You go through it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you identified it as a we
Yeah.
scenario as opposed to just your husband. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Megan in the chat is asking if psychotherapy was offered.
No, nothing was offered. We figured things out ourselves. And I actually, when he was returning to work, his confidence was affected. And Siva is like, at one point, I would say even overconfident. He was fearless surgeon, right? So, and to see him like stumble there, I actually got him a personal coach. But the only one I could find was related to the church. So it was a bit of a religious based one, but just to talk to somebody and and somebody other than me, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Stephanie, you have a question?
Thanks, Libby. I just had a question about post-stroke fatigue and how you balanced all of the, the friends and family or all of the visitors with in that really acute stage when you said they were lined up at the door, how you balanced that with, his need to recover and his need to rest.
I was actually happy to see all of them. So I didn't even think about tiredness or anything, but by the end of the day, probably.
Yeah, but the nurses on the stroke floor were shooing everybody away because they say he has to rest, he has to rest.
The nurses probably were more tired than me.
Yeah, but I think it was something people needed to see because we say this in our book, but it's like when you ask anything prognostic on the stroke unit or rehab unit, the famous saying is, we don't know, because every stroke patient is different. So it's like people had to see because there are people who die from stroke, and then there are people who said they had a stroke and you would never know, it's so mild, So I think for our people who knew us, they needed to see Siva and see whether
He
he
actually had a stroke.
yeah. So we appreciated that care and concern, but he was fatigued in the beginning, and that fatigue was very much part and parcel of the journey. But like everything, practice, practice, practice. And today he works just like the hours I put in, and he's fine. He looks forward to the weekends though, but
Thank you, Dr. Murugapan and Dr. Sammy. I don't see any other questions. So I'm just going to wrap us up and thank everybody again for joining us today. A big thank you again to our guest speakers. Just a reminder to please complete the evaluation, as your feedback on today's session is very valuable for future planning. And the next Provincial Stroke Rounds will be held on May 1st. The topic is A Journey to the Center of the Brain, a novel technology to explore the inside of brain vessels and its application in stroke. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.